Welcome to another episode of Catalyzing Radical Systemic Change, where in my own words, it's all about discovering, mapping, and cross-pollinating the various building blocks towards a planetary civilization ahead. What do I mean with a planetary civilization? With that, I frankly mean that I think we're on the cusp of recognizing as humanity that we are the dominant species on this planet, if we like it or not. We live in the Anthropocene. So the systems we built at large in the first, second, third, and now the fourth industrial revolution won't uphold us to live in peace, harmony, and resiliency with the mother organism Gaia that I think we're ultimately all part of. So it's not like we are here and then suddenly, the other sentient creatures on this planet, but also all the unsentient beings seemingly, like the minerals, the water, the earth, the fire, the clouds. For me, all of that makes up this one ecosystem that we're part of. So having paraphrased that, I'm curious today to dive into, I think, a heavily abused buzzword, which is decentralization. So with the advent of blockchain technology and so many crypto projects out there that proclaim to be decentralized, I'm really super curious to talk with, I would call you a veteran. I know you're a dash older than me, but you're really since the very early days immersed into blockchain technology. The interesting thing, though, is I've covered blockchain quite a bit in my podcast, is you're originally a physician by training. So we're going to cover in that podcast with Dr. Alex Cahana a couple of the projects that he's advising, from, I would say, big picture projects like network states in emerging markets to applying blockchain technology to revolutionize healthcare services. Having said all of that, Alex, I'm super grateful to be in that room together in between Santa Lucia Milpas Altas in Guatemala and New York City. I'm super grateful that life makes us meet. And like always in the podcast, we're starting with the human being. So who made you that beautiful creature that you are, and what are two or three pivotal moments in your biography that shaped that purpose, the path, the human being that you are? The floor is yours, Alex. Super curious to listen into a couple of pivotal moments in your biography.
Oh, thank you so much, Alistair. What inspiring words, and it's a pleasure to be here. And I'm looking very much forward for this conversation. As you alluded to, it's a journey. It has been a journey. It still is a journey. It will always be a journey. I always say I lived 4 lives in one, which means not only that I'm old, but also I know the dirty little secrets of each life. I would say that my first chapter, and a significant one, was in the military. I say that because in the military, you are mission-driven, data-driven, and situation-aware, but you also understand that none of us is as good as all of us. And so this idea of working in a team, recognizing the other, being, in an alpha team of many alphas, that's who I am and part of my DNA. I saw pain in the battlefield, which led me to my second chapter, which is pain medicine. And I opened multiple pain centers around the world. So not only do I speak multiple languages, but also cultural differences with regard to health and well-being, and also how healthcare in general functions around the world. And that brought me into seeing the good and the bad in each system to really reflect on what's going on. And do, I want to say, systems redesign. I've always been interested in technology integration and the patient-doctor dialogue. So really trying to understand how that impacts our work. And now, to your point, in the cusp of moving and accelerating AI, I really entered into this world trying to understand, and that's how I got into blockchain as a coordination tool, and decentralization as how does it bring us together, not so much about interoperability, but more about intercooperability. And so these are kind of like The phases from decentralized health, I realized you can't speak about mental health and physical health without speaking about planet health and financial health. And so then realizing that DeFi is not enough, we need to redefine, right? Redefine by regenerative decentralized financing. And so that is why I've been working very hard on building decentralized communities where we are high tech, high touch, and in touch communities.
I will use a word that usually I touch upon very much later in a podcast. But since I know we will go from the very micro boots on the ground describing projects that you help get off the ground and scale, I love the wouldn't call it a format or a process, the framework of a theory of change. So in the many articles you wrote, in the many founders, co-founders, and advisory positions you found yourself in, why do you claim the hashtag decentralize everything? What are the different ingredients? Because everything is I would say pretty bold, right? But if we take out the ontological meaning of everything, let's say decentralized most of what we know as centralized, something like that. What are the building blocks that make you so sure that, first of all, this is already happening? Secondly, more of it will happen, almost like, platformizing everything. And then secondly, why do you think that will lead towards more resilience, for example, in healthcare or other systems in society?
Yeah, it's an excellent reflection here. I think that most people who talk about decentralization, their argument is that a decentralized system where there's not a honeypot of anything, a honeypot of data or money or power, it makes it security resistant, it makes it collusion resistant, and it makes it censor resistant. And that's a fancy way of saying that if you have all your money in one bank account, everybody's going to hack it. And if you have, instead of $1 billion in one account, you have a billion accounts with $1, nobody's going to do the effort because it's just too hard to break into. People now are very sensitive, understanding that their data is used, loosed, and abused by other entities. And so they feel censored, they feel deplatformed. I had things taken off different platforms because it didn't follow community guidelines and it was not clear to anyone what are the guidelines here. And of course the collusion, it's people in power usually looking like me, shaking hands with other people looking like me, extracting, exploiting, excluding. So most people who talk about decentralization is really to avoid the problems that centralization causes. What they don't talk about, and that is really the impetus of why I'm interested in, I say decentralized everything, is that centralization is not bad, essentially. It streamlines things, it's not messy, it's clarity, you get things done, you know who to talk to if there's a problem, but it atrophies your self-agency, it atrophies your self-custody, your self-sovereignty. You're like a child. It makes you an infant to the point where you can't even believe that you're able to do things. And so that's really the issue, that we have become defeatists and we've become fearful and we really stopped believing in our power to control our destiny. And so the idea of decentralization is more self-actualization. And so the model is transparency, trust, and token. In other words, we create this transparency of how things are done. Everybody sees it on a public ledger. Of course, privacy, anonymity, we can talk about that. That creates trust, not just, okay, Alex, you look like a nice guy, I believe it, but also computational trust. And also you can attach value to anything. You can appraise it, you can value it, you can exchange it, trade it. So I call it token simply because it's a T. So I like the TTT model. But that's really what this is all about. In healthcare, for example, transform people from passive health service consumers, because that's what we do. We just use stuff, a pill for every ill, a test for every pest. That's pretty much it. To actually be the producers of health and wealth. And that's exciting, especially now when we're going into a world of AI, where we have to be more resilient, more self-actualizing, and more self-sovereign than ever.
I want to so I want to stay on the high level. As a trained macroeconomist, and deep into the rabbit holes of decentralization, I would say, since the very early days, I studied macroeconomics, both mainstream as well as alternative monetary theory, complementary and alternative monetary systems. I want to touch upon when you mentioned centralization is not bad per se. And I want to take an odd example and let's see where this high level example ties then into other examples, maybe from healthcare. I think by the very nature of some very complex industrial processes, let's say just wafer production to produce silicon chips, I think to a certain extent, some of these high-tech industries will have global supply chains, even in like 10, 20, 30, 40 years. Well, then I die, roughly, right? But when we look about, for example, food production, it became very clear, especially in the crisis or in the COVID crisis, but before that with the Arab Spring, that it's actually very fragile and not very resilient to need to rely on like global supply chains, for example, for food production. So I wonder, out of these two odd random examples where I think food production should be highly decentralized, as local and seasonal as possible, and maybe some high-tech industries need some degree of centralization. And I wonder how you can take either one or both of the examples to maybe let loose a little bit of this, like we need to decentralize everything. Maybe most of the stuff, but maybe for some processes, there's a certain need of centralization before we dive deeper.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think those two examples are very good examples, because obviously when I say decentralize everything, I'm trying to be provocative here. And I see decentralization more as a spectrum of things. But I think that it's important for the audience to understand when is centralization good and when decentralization is necessary. And so to your point, when we have stuff, supply chains, materials, things that require coordination where we don't want things to be messy and they're standardized, then yeah, centralization of certain processes help. But decentralization is always better when humans are involved, because humans are not automata. Humans always insert their interpretation into the process. They create an ambiguity. And that's exactly the difference between a complication or complications and complexity. So a complication is like the watch, we both come from a place where we love our watches, right? And so Philippe Patek's complications, just a lot of little stuff. And so, yeah, you need to centralize and make sure that each little thingy, or to your point, the GPUs or whatever, the chips and all this, they are reproducible. And then reductionism is good, because if you understand how the little thingy works, then you can understand how the big thingy works. That is okay. But complexity in open dynamic systems, like social systems, like macroeconomic systems, like Gaia, like things that involve human beings, are complex systems. They are dynamic. There's an emergence. So an example of an emergence is, a chocolate cake. Okay? I can cut it with a knife to 1,000,000 pieces. I will never get the flour, the eggs, the cocoa, and the water again. Never. And so reductionism doesn't help. And now the reason that my chocolate cake doesn't taste as good as, I don't know, Cédric Grolet's chocolate cake is because there's historicity, because there's talent, because there's secret sauce, because there's something in it that's infused that it emerges it. So I think that decentralization is appropriate when there is ambiguity, when there's complexity, when there's emerging properties that you want to check. Where centralization would be more for these kind of like reductionist things. And the reason that this is such a shift for people to understand is that maybe my generation more than yours, I was taught to think global and act local. It's like, figure out how this works and then go away and tell all the world to do it in a centralized way. This is how Alex decided, so this is how healthcare should be. No, it's about thinking local and act global. It's going to the South Pacific. It's going to Africa. It's going to Latin America and the Caribbean, seeing certain things that, wow, I would have never got to that. And from there, replicate either in toto or in composable parts and elements of it. That's how nature works.
I love the metaphor of the chocolate cake, even though I have no idea of that fancy French guy you mentioned. I think maybe the best way to approach your own learning process and your immersion with decentralized technology is to really take a historic approach. What was a pivotal moment and a project you took on, doesn't matter if it was successful or it failed, where you were testing, let's say blockchain technology, whatever, 6, 8, 10 years ago. And what was the test bed, the sandbox? What did you learn and the people on the ground? What did not work? I think this historic approach is easier for the manifold founder, co-founder, investor, advisory positions you have taken in your life.
Yeah. So I'm just noting down, not to forget, but I think that, like life, a lot of things just haphazardly come to you. And so when I moved to New York in 2013, I decided I'm not going to open a pain clinic for the 7th time in my life. And so I started to advise investment firms on what usually doctors advise, genomics, devices, pharma, help analysts, give color to what is real and what is not. And I came across, I worked with Kathy Wood, I still do, in ARK Investment, and and Chris Bernitzky at the time was the blockchain analyst and all this. And I heard about this blockchain and Bitcoin and this, and I really had trouble understanding it. And so I really spent, I want to say now in retrospect, it was more than it felt, but about 2 years to really go deep down into it and understand how this works. And that kind of brought us into the ICO craze. And because I was one of the few crypto health, if you wish, it always, I think my first post in 2016 was, why does crypto need a doctor and why does medicine need blockchain? It was like really two environments that don't speak to each other. And so a lot of companies that wanted to do health blockchain applications in healthcare came to me. And I would say 9 out of 10 or 99 out of 100 don't exist anymore. But the idea was to take every single thing and try to blockchainize it, if you wish. Attach tokens to it, put it on a ledger, has utility, doesn't have utility, it helps the process, doesn't help the process. We were just nuts. And a lot of it was fun and a lot of it popped and a lot of it didn't happen. We can have a separate conversation what I think about ICOs and what it does vis-a-vis sentiment analysis or things of that sort. But the point was that it helped me understand what are real versus non-real applications and what is easy and what is hard. And so I have 5 applications, and obviously this is evolving, and maybe in our next conversation there'll be 7. But from the most simple to the most complex or the most reluctant to do, and this is where COVID helped us understand, is that the easiest is supply chain. Where are the ventilators? Where's the toilet paper? Where's the gel? Using distributed ledger technology to streamline a supply chain is not complicated. And connecting a vaccine to a person with digital identity, it doesn't matter if it's self-sovereign or not, easy, understandable, to the point that the previous two administrations actually used blockchain technology in their procurement process. Nobody talks about it. Nobody says that there are actually real companies that are doing real stuff, like in shipping and government, and centralized entities are using, blockchain technology, but supply chain. The next is people, credentialing. Who am I, who I'm not, especially in countries where they don't have a system to credential. In the US, it's a business, so it's difficult to extricate it. People pay thousands of dollars a year to be re-credentialed or get credentials in hospitals. And that the same thing was what happened with COVID. It's like a nurse needs to move to another hospital, they need to be credentialed. So if you solve that, and instead of paying $7,000 a year, you pay $7 a year, someone's going to be unhappy. But when you go to a country like Kenya or Zambia or Cote d'Ivoire, and there's no system, and they use it on paper, putting it on a digital ledger is godsend. So supply chain tracking stuff, value chain credentialing, tracking people. Then, of course, the next is clinical trial management, because now we have a person and a jab and a vaccine and an arm. Can we test new things? So clinical trial management systems are important. Now, I will tell you that people use, and pharma uses the word decentralized clinical trial management systems, but they're not really decentralized. What they mean when they say decentralized is actually virtual. It's that I don't have to go to the, spot to go out to the field. When I say decentralized, I mean putting data in a decentralized distributed ledger. So
let me tie into that. So I think let's assume the listeners know at least high level what's actually really the killer application of decentralized ledger technology, right? Which is you're cutting out a middleman, right? You have an immutable ledger that stores data across time and space. And that's why I think from 199 die, but both supply chain as well as the credentials work. I wonder if you sprinkle in other examples that are not related to, let's say, the medical terrain only, because in us building the relationship, you've been more like, I would say, like a butterfly, but like certainly very multifaceted in your advisory positions and the projects you're driving. So from the 99 dying, what besides supply chain and credentials are signs of hope or seedlings that you sense are powerful ways to decentralize whole nation states, micronations, stuff like that?
Yeah. It is true that it is easy to imagine and to copy paste things that happen in one industry vertical to another. So when I look right now at what are the things that are most easily adapted, the equivalent would be, for example, in land deeds and in real estate, which everybody knows that it's a mess and it's very frictionful and labor intensive, and there's a lot of capital leakage. And so when we talk about disintermediation, we talk about, the lack of a need for a verification of a third party. So all these escrows and lawyers and notaries and, brokers and so forth. So that is something that not only increases margins, which means that there's more money in your pocket and not, going in between all those that are in that process. Real estate is the first thing that you want when you go to a nation state or an island nation. It's like, who owns the land? How do I prove it? What do I own? How do I show it? The next is actually the whole financial, you know, how do I transfer funds, between countries and all that. So like when I go to a South Pacific country like Vanuatu and I want to exchange $100, I give $100 in one end and I get $67 in Vatu, and a third of that money evaporated between the forex and the fees and the success fee. And like, what is a success fee? I put it in. If it succeeds, then I'll take the fee. If it doesn't, you can keep it. It's like there's so much leakage that, and obviously it's those who are the most vulnerable that need every dollar. They're the ones who suffer the most. Then, of course, when we talk about that, the next phase of when you create a community is energy. And so microgrids, and how do you calculate the transfer of energy from one node to another? How can you streamline the relationships, and some use accumulate carbon credits or other things. And so what I want to say, for me, and that's really the issue. What I like most is a killer app. I'm always like worried about, like, are you asking what I think should be the killer app or what everybody's using? Because people are interested in stuff. I'm interested in people. For me, it's the governance. For me is, how do we get along as a society? How do we vote? How do we have a voice? How do we resolve disputes? And that's why they're just excellent platforms that can, first of all, have identity in it. So say, okay, this is really Alex. And not every time I have to fill all the list, okay, who is that? But Alex that has all his attributes, that he is a doctor, that he is in tech, that he's a consultant, that he is nice, that he is 6 foot, that he weighs blah, blah. It's like, okay, but also reputation, longitudinal in time. He's a good guy. Why? Because these are his successes, because this is what he does, because these are the testimonials. So you build identity, you build reputation, you build trust. And so then if I have like a reputation coin, you don't need to know anything about me. It's like you see the reputation, and not some verified, okay, it has a blue mark on I don't know what platform, and everybody knows it's nonsense. So I think those are really the killer apps of creating that intercooperability, which replicates life. Because if you now say, oh, do you know someone who's knows blockchain, and also a doctor, and he's really nice? Oh yeah, I know this guy. He doesn't need more than your recommendation. So you don't need to know everything about me to have that reputational coin. So I think those, for me, titles, transactions, and reputation, that is really the killer apps that will move forward. And, I think that becomes even more important because we're now going to interact with machines. And there's soon going to be like more machines than people. So you want to know their identity and their reputation and how they interact between themselves. And so it's not essentially very different than in healthcare, because the two other examples that I wanted to give, one was the Health and Information Exchange Program, and the other one is DAOs, the Decentralized Autonomous Organizations, of how do we self-organize as a community of researchers, of patients, of whatnot. So it's not very different if you look at real estate or minerals or energy or education or gaming. It's always the same thing. Stuff, people, interactions.
Then, unplanned, but I would like to take a segue into the rabbit hole of network states. And I will paraphrase how I sense at large, how I observe network states. For me, often it feels white, male, very privileged people have crazy ideas with good intentions and create just another more sophisticated layer where they don't have to pay taxes. Usually that's part of the game. So it's a neoliberal paradigm gone haywire, where then more of the same, meaning affluent investors that want to don't want to pay taxes wherever they live, um, build luxury communities where, sure, the people adjacent that have been born into post-colonial situations maybe get a better job, or they're the maid, or they're the cook, or they built these luxury homes. But I wonder, specifically from that network state experiment in Vanuatu that you're so deeply involved in for many years, how are you trying to create true inclusivity where it's again an often abused metaphor, but really the tide raises all ships, and not just another exclusive luxury condo as an extraterritorial space, usually in an emerging country.
Yeah, that is an accurate and deep observation that I totally adhere to, and it's all about intent. And so, for those who don't know, network states, if I would have to explain in one sentence, is a DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization, means an organization that's owned by no one and everyone and governed by code. And on top of that, it has actual land, like we have on Satoshi Island, or in what we're starting on Kopangan or whatnot. And it's like it actually has land, which is a real thing, and a seat somewhere. So I don't know, eventually, if it's network nations, a seat in the United Nations, or they are a recognized member in the community of the world. It doesn't stand alone. So there might be like the network of network states. So I would say there are now about a dozen projects out there in the world, Prospera, Liberland, Zuzelo, all kinds of places that, so there's some interaction or some, the conference of or the coalition of. But you're right that in this not only neoliberal, but also I want to say postmodern world that we live in, everything is kind of like, yeah, it's not personal. It's that's how we business does. I poison the water, I pollute the nature. That's what business is. It's nothing personal. So there is this kind of like laissez-faire, and you're not the boss of me. And that's not really a sustainable approach or a regenerative approach. And so for us, in order to keep that essence, not of I want to retreat from the world, I want to run away from governments, I want to run away from taxes, I want to run away from regulation. We come from a place of where we want to lead. We want to show that it is possible to translate real world interactions into real world assets. It is possible to incentivize responsible and ethical production and consumption. It is possible to make financial incentives to invest in the commons. That it is more important to me to make sure that my sidewalk downstairs is cleaner than my house, which is the opposite of what happens now. That your health and your well-being is as important to me, not from a moral reason, that's fine too, but for a real economic reason. And so that's really what this is all about. And I think that the main thing that changes and where people really have a tough time wrapping their head around is the question of ownership. That the capitalist or colonialist or imperialist idea of ownership, that's mine, which means it's not yours, which means that if you want access to it, you got to pay me and pay a lot. And so obviously we sit on the island. My dwelling is the closest to the waterfall. Everybody drinks from the waterfall. Everybody bathes in the waterfall. Now imagine one day I put a chair outside and I put a rope outside and I have a plastic bottle and I say, okay, you want a drink? Here's the bottle. You now to pay me 100 vatu. It's like, what the hell? That water's not yours. It's the world's, it's nature's. And so ownership doesn't mean that's mine. I can hold on to it for eternity with even destroying it. Forget not in productive ways, but even destroying it, hoping that one day the government will want it and pay me $1 billion to put a highway in it and I'll leave. But to actually say ownership is an ownership of your commitments, that we are part of a community, that each one has a role, and we do pooling of resources. So I'm a doctor, Richard is an engineer, and Dennis is in hospitality. So when Richard says, my knee hurts, I treat his knee. When my computer is broken, he fixes it. And when we're both hungry, we go to Dennis and he feeds us. There's no need for colored paper money with pictures of kings, queens, colonizers, and slave owners to be in between that interaction. So that's the idea of how do you quantify, calculate, create not only liquidity pools, but commitment pools where people are incentivized to contribute and to make sure that if everybody grows, then they grow as well. And those are the things that it has to be regenerative, has to be protecting the nature, has to be protecting us, it has to be geared, all the economic activity towards the commons.
Then I want to stay in the segue because obviously as the trained macroeconomist, but also the mystical creature and the always aspiring to at least create sandboxes to be a test bed for the utopia I think we all in our hearts both know is possible, as well as aspire to leave, for the future generation, just at least examples of a healthier, more equilibrated life. I wonder, Alex, how can we sketch to listeners that are not as deep in blockchain, decentralization, and network states, what is actually I would call it a karmic vector or a dharmic vector, because I feel we are the first generation who can design, prototype, implement, and iterate to create societies, I reckon only mid-scale, in the best case scenario, small nation states when I die, or micronations or something like that, really like on a drawing board. But the drawing board that involves humans, machines, code, but also involves the real thing, like real earth, position on title, to then truly design how money flows, how value flows, how trust flows, how commitment flows, how all of this is measured. So this is a big undertaking. And always when I sense into these beautiful, at least from the intention, these beautiful network state projects, I always get reminded of the last novel of Aldous Huxley, The Island. And funnily enough, many of those network state prototypes, experiments are literally on small island nation states. So is this less a question and more a joint exploration? Where do you sense these prototypes standing? Maybe starting with Vanuatu, but also the other ones that you're familiar with. And what can they grow realistically into?
Sure. Your sentiment is correct. And I want to, before I answer that, give a very simple example so that your listeners won't feel that this is too much of a undertaking. So I want to now underwhelm everybody to just show how it is so simple. It really is. That technology doesn't do anything. It's what people do with technology that makes a difference. So I'm not going to talk about blockchain. I'm going to talk about AI, for example. Just something very simple that each and every one of like people who maybe own businesses or invest in businesses, not to do things differently, but just view them differently. So let's say, for example, you're an owner of a business, okay? And the business cost you $100 and you made profit $200. Okay. So with the $100, you pay whatever, wages, amortization, I don't know, all the stuff, and you keep the 100 for profit. Okay. And then I come to you and I say, look, I have this thingy AI that now will make everything your cost instead of 150. Okay, so I'll leave now the audience to think for 2 seconds. What are you going to do now? What does capitalism teach you? What are the macroeconomic fundamentals, or what does Adamsonian capitalism teach us, or whatever? Now, I think most of us would say, okay, that's a good thing. That's a good thing. So what I'll do is now the cost is only 50, so I can make a profit of 150 if it's the same profit next year. But you have to understand that was a human choice. It could have given me another answer. The answer that it could have given me was, oh, that's excellent. I'll use this. And so now I will tell everybody to work in the morning, and in the afternoon, the AI will do their job. And they can go home. Not only because 100 is enough and you don't need 150, but because it's better business. Because when you send them home, in scenario one is, I hate AI because of that I lost my job, or I love AI because now I can go home, play the piano, create, maybe code for the company, and come up and work with a project to make the company better. It is better business to treat people with love. And so when we talk about design, this is not a dehumanized, detached, decontextualized design. It is understanding that the foundational premise, the foundational energy is love. It is living one vibrational energy. That's what love means. Living one vibrational energy. That I love you and you love me, not in an intimate way, not in a physical way, but in a species way. We have this attachment. We understand our role. And when did I understand that? It was when I was in the Mara. Told you that story. I was with my buddy, Joab, and this, and we saw the lions. They were super skinny. I said, what's going on? Are they on Ozempic? And they said, no. It said the rain made the grass too high. I can't see the impalas, so they're skinny. And the hyenas are injuring them and they're eating them. And like, oh my God, what will happen? It says, well, if all of them die, then there'll be too many impalas. And what will happen? Well, they'll eat all the grass. They'll become skinny, and then the hyenas will eat them. I said, oh my God, what will happen? No lions, no impalas. I said, yeah, and then there'll be just hyenas and they'll eat each other. And I said, oh my God, you just described New York City. So people need to wake up and understand that the more we let people drown, the harder it's going to be to swim. And so that's the design. It's not some Web3 playing with some tokenomics and fancying. Yeah, that is good too. Gamification, knowing game theory, aversion loss, all these anchoring, all these wonderful things. But the fundamental thing is we need to be human and love each other. Otherwise, this is not going to work. And that's the cusp that we're in. This sense of universal, and again, I'm worried. I don't want to sound too fluffy and all that, but it's about unity. It's about convergence. It's about cosmic intelligence. It's not natural intelligence and artificial intelligence, but the cosmic intelligence. So when people ask me, what do you think about, are you worried about AI? I say, I'm not worried about artificial intelligence. I'm more worried about natural stupidity. So we live in a world where we can solve everything.
Yeah, I could not agree more. Really. Let's stay on the love frequency and use the Horizon 1, 2, 3 framework. So much like myself, you're the guy craving the new, right? So for whatever karmic reason, I personally have never asked myself the question. I've always been craving the newest shit, right? So, by the very nature, when you were mentioning 99 of the 100 projects were dying out, these are the official numbers from every mature venture capitalist, right? You invest into 99 companies, maybe 98 fail completely or 95 fail completely. 3 to 4 go like okay, and one goes through the roof. So just as a feedback and more to the listeners. I love the Horizon 1, 2, 3 framework. So when you look into the various initiatives that you're involved in, from, let's say, the bits and pieces on the medical side, the nation state, I would call them experiments, the network states. What do you see realistically happening in the next 2, 3, 4 years? I know, strictly speaking, that's not a Horizon 2. We're mixing Horizon 1 and 2. And then I want to look into the crystal ball. What do you sense can happen in your lifetime, on your deathbed? What is the boldest vision that love provides you with the energy to spur that transition?
Yeah. So I think that what I'm going to say is going to sound completely logical. And in the short term, a lot has been built. When I compare the stuff that was in 2013, 2014, that we don't know what the hell we were doing. I was reading stuff that I wrote then. I was like, what the hell was I talking about? So I feel that there are now a lot of tools in the toolbox. And so in the short term, now we're starting to compose them like a Lego, starting to build little things, not extravagant mansions of this, but little huts, little things, and putting them together. And it can be not just in a single vertical, it could be cross vertical. There are always elements in it. There's elements of data. That's the glue. Data is the glue. And as long as we recognize that data and that data illiquidity is the problem. And so what you want is that kind of not the data rest in silos and attach to it value and realize that data is essentially dignity. It's dignified labor. And that you're not allowed to take that and not compensate to me in some shape or form, monetary, non-monetary, but it's not, or to use my daughter's language, it's not cool to do that. So in the short term, it'll be cobbling different things. Some of them are more precise, and have, actual use cases, like an electronic health record in Africa called Afia record, or, supply chain called Remedy, or BlockCube, doing stuff in clinical trials. I'm not singling out. There are like dozens of them similar, but these are like in the short term is just take that. And so when I go to a country and they want digital transformation, I want it to be with a Web3 ready solution. So that's what's happening now. When I get a call to Cote d'Ivoire, I say, look, don't use something that was built in 1970. Use this. Use something that was built in Africa by Africans for Africans. In the midterm, it's going to be the convergence. And I wrote a post about it. This year is not only the year of the snake, but it's the year of the convergence. And just like the snake that is adaptable and wants to kind of like protect, it's the same thing. Blockchain can make AI better, and AI can make blockchain better. And it's not just those two. There's also a full stack of privacy and depth technology, full homomorphic encryption, zero knowledge. I don't want to say stuff that people are not aware of, but just given the sentiment, there is stuff out there. There is not just, chopsticks or one type of fork.
Let's stay on the more simple language. So, I'm personally born 1979 and raised into a very activist family. My father is founding member of the German Green Party. He then built the first PR agency on sustainability issues, met Ken Wilber when I was 24, and all these crazy ideas ahead, especially in my teens and mid-20s. Ever since, for whatever karmic reason, all my peers, meaning the weirdos like you, the people I interview on the podcast, my business partners, ever since COVID, I feel a strong tailwind. Can you paraphrase, besides maybe using too many words that the listeners won't understand, where do you feel and sense and could prove convergence?
Yeah, I think that what COVID taught us or showed us were two things. One is that we're incapable of collaborating. We're incapable of solving a planetary problem like a pandemic, which, by the way, when you look at different epochs in history, it's always like that. Either there's this huge climate event, like the small ice age or whatever, or there's a plague like the Black Fever, things of that sort, the Justinian plague. I don't know. There's like these big things where a third of the world dies and say, okay, this is not great. And it's the universe's way of saying, you got to calm down a little bit. Because during COVID, suddenly I started to hear birds. The planet loved it. The planet started to finally. I think that people understand, one is that we can't solve things, and we have this adversarial relationship with Gaia that we have to, it can't be that we can only succeed if we hurt Gaia, because Gaia will hurt us back and she will win. So that's the first thing. And the second is that the reason behind it, the energy, the motor behind it, is the opposite of love, which is not hate, it's fear. And fear comes, from lack of trust, lack of understanding, and all that. So that means that the first step that we need to do is to introduce that transparency and introduce that trust. And people need to put energy. They cannot continue to be disinterested in technology. You need digital literacy and financial literacy, and you cannot say, oh, this computer is not my thing. You just cannot. And so that convergence is also converging people into the process, not something happening to you, but you are the author of your story. That's why from the beginning, we said in the beginning of this conversation, this is why decentralization is awesome. Because it's messy, it's complicated, but that's the whole point, to be involved in this. So the long term, because you asked me, so what is the long vision? How am I going to see that? It's going to be stuff that like, what? I can't believe it. And, anybody who likes Star Trek, or there was this, all these different science fiction, series is not only what we call a post-labor market, that AI will do a lot of the menial jobs, which will leave us the good things to do, but also a post-monetary world where we won't need that colored paper money to transact, that we will be able to value, like this podcast. Okay. This is an act of wisdom, an act of kindness, an act of generosity. It has value. You can't say the value is zero. So how do you translate that, besides giving me a thumbs up and inviting me again? So there will be ways. My feeling is that it'll be through energy. I really do, because energy is everywhere. Like Einstein said, energy is everything. So you can calculate energy, how much you eat, how much you walk. Every single act that you do can be expressed in energetic values that are in physics are objective. I was in a resort and I threw a towel on the floor. That has an energetic expense. But instead of saying to you, oh, you have to pay me with that colored money, instead pay me back with activity. Because people are not poor, people are just cash poor. So go down to the beach and clean the beach. Go down to the corals, restore the corals. Go up to the woods and do landscaping. Everything that we do, what we eat, what we drink, what we expel is energy, and we don't need that intermediary artificial thing that we invented. That coinish thing that we invented, and it wasn't always like this. That's the world that we're going to live. Yes, high tech. I love shiny stuff. High tech, but it's also high touch and in touch, where each and every one of us went through that spiritual journey.
Then, towards the end of the podcast, I find it very interesting that I think my main aha moment with you is, we are truly the creators. We are the authors. The future is not written. So every feeling, every word, every action, every interaction, every business relationship, every investment, every bet into the future, every advisory position co-creates the future. So I know some people may get even more science fiction. I tend towards pretty science fiction, and multi-capitalist approach and monetary exchange will be just one flavor of a full stack of possibilities to
Energetic
interface
exchange.
globally without close to no gas fee, no close to no transaction fee. In my most positive, wild dreams. I'm not now sketching my intergenerational vision, but literally when I die, whatever, hopefully when I'm 85 or something like that, right? I truly believe that small island nations, like all of New Zealand, a consortium of micronations, all of Polynesia, some outliers, the Basque Country, Catalonia, some resource rich, kind of omitted former banana republics like Guatemala or Uruguay, can really leapfrog and design a completely new societal operating system. And finally, understand that the monetary infrastructure is just one of the components that we need to redesign. But if we put well-being, flourishing, creative expression, joy, happiness first, and design currency systems and monetary systems off the back of that, it's very much a pivotal moment. I truly believe, certainly in the last, let's say, 500 years ever since, Europeans colonized the Americas. And in my most optimistic dreams and visions, I truly believe that this will also inspire, create a feedback loop to the entrenched power structures. So I want to leave with a funny, deep aha moment I truly only had a couple of years ago. I was a fervent adversary of nuclear technology, including nuclear weapons. I don't know when that happened. A couple of years ago, I suddenly had this thanks God, thanks creation, we created nuclear weapons because finally, we cannot wage war everybody on everybody because that would mean total nuclear, war
Armageddon.
all over the Armageddon all over the planet. So even though we're in a very warmongering atmosphere, I truly don't believe the number one most aggressive country and military on the planet, like the US, can't invade China and India and Brazil and Japan and all of Africa at the same time, right? And I find it kind of a game theoretical koan. Instead of calling it a paradox, a koan is what a spiritual, usually a Zen Buddhist master gives you to kind of sit with in your meditation. It's one of these paradoxes your mind can't solve, but you can find the essence of an answer within yourself. So, what is the most optimistic outlook up until you die, we die, let's say our generation, hands over to the next generation? And then I have a last answer that I hardly ever ask
Yeah.
anybody.
Yeah. I think that for me, I would like until my last breath to see the world that you described. You heard me say this more than once, where we love people and use things, and not like how we live now, where we love things and use people. That's really what this is all about. And again, it is not only human centric, it's human driven. We are driving it. We have to stop thinking that things are imposed on us. That is, and I'm not pretending that there are people, in the Maslow scale that it's really tough for them. I get it. But the majority of the 8 billion people that wake up in the morning, they are the masters of their life. And the decision not to live it at the fullest is their decision. By omission, by commission, it doesn't matter. So this is a call to action to think local and act global and spread the living one vibrational energy.
We never talked about that in us getting to know each other and kind of having this sparkle in the vibe. I have received visions my whole life, from early childhood, in plant medicine ceremonies, in a darkness retreat. And one of the most powerful visions that I received 10 years ago when I was 35 on an ayahuasca journey was an interplanetary, interspecies vision. And I want to sketch it and then ask you, have you ever received some type of a vision that's beyond your own deathbed, beyond this speck of lifetime we're granted as the possibility to express ourselves and, unlock the full potential that make us each human. So the vision that I received is stunningly similar to the movie Valerian from Luc Besson, the most expensive movie ever produced in Europe. So I was in that vision and I saw me leaving in a spaceship, but almost like a train type situation, Mother Earth, like our mother organism, but from an interplanetary perspective. And we were meeting a lot of other sentient beings from different star systems. And for me in that vision, which I pretty exactly, much like Valerian, saw like and perceived like in 500-ish years, could be 250 years, could be 500, could be a little more, but not like a million years in the future, where we have come to grips that A, we're the dominant species, B, the genius that we unlocked modern technology, which is also nature, right? It's just the nature that we as humans create is technology. It's just a layer of nature. And we have used that technology, that genius, that magic, that love as technology to heal the many wounds we inflicted on the mother organism. So it was kind of a techno-utopian mixed with a hippie vibe, interplanetary species vision. And it has been really the cornerstone of everything I do in the last 10 years. So this may sound totally absurd to some of the listeners. I don't give a shit. This is my podcast and I do the conversations with whomever I vibe with. So have you ever received a vision? What is your boldest, craziest, fanciest, most colorful vision in your life?
Yeah, you know that as someone from my generation who has been in academia for almost 30 years, we're not allowed to have these type of visions. It's like this is classified. We know all the diagnoses, and so I have to seek medical help if I start to. But I want to say, just like you, I've had multiple calls that maybe I haven't appreciated them in real time when they happened, or I didn't understand them the way I understand things now later in life. But to your point, it's all about observation and understanding, quantum, and that the way we observe already impacts what we're looking at. And I was in Satoshi Island, in the country of Vanuatu, a small island called traditionally Lataro. I was doing stargazing, and I was looking up and I was wondering, wait a second, I know that star is 1,000,000 miles away, light years away. So they are in my past, and I am their future. But then there's someone there at the same time that's looking at me, and he's saying, that thing called Gaia, they're my past, and I am their future. And I'm like, okay, something's going on here. And I just started to spend a couple of days rereading, special relativity and trying to understand space-time continuum and realized that it doesn't matter really all these explanations that we're trying to give to us. We found the Higgs boson. You didn't find the Higgs boson. It was there before. You just found a way to understand it or express it in a language that has, a large list of symbols in it and say, that's a Higgs boson. It's just like saying that love is Dirac's, equation of entanglement. Because what is quantum entanglement? Two particles, a world apart that feel the same thing and they're interconnected. That is love. That, for me, in the macro world, love is Dirac's equation. So we don't discover anything. It's already there. The cosmic universe has everything in it. And we are suspended. And suddenly I start to think of the Dalai and his teachings. And it's saying, we live like we're never going to die. And we die like we never lived. And that's the vision that I have, that we have to live in the present. That's why it's a present that was given to us. If I think of the past, I'm just depressed. If I think of the future, I'm anxious because it's unknowable. Why is it unknowable? Because the minute I know it, it's not the future anymore. So all this, when people ask me about consciousness and say, oh, there's the world out there. There's no world out there. Okay? It is the world that you create. It's not a reality. That is your reality that is out there. It's the extension. And that helps. That helps because suddenly AI is not a machine that I have to fight with. It's an extension of myself. This is AI. Okay? I take it off. I can't see you. Now I put it on. I can see you. AI, I don't understand. Put AI, now I understand. It is an extension of myself. So we're not afraid of AI. We are afraid of ourselves. We're not afraid of the future. We're afraid of ourselves. So let's embrace it. Let's be the authors. And that's the vision that I have. With species, with other forms of intelligence. Because at any rate, it's all part of the cosmic intelligence.
Alex, thanks for this epic podcast. Thanks for your ending. I have nothing to add but one thing. Grateful that life makes us meet, and on to authoring and doing great things together. Thanks so much for the conversation.